Over 2,000 people are reported missing every day. Some go missing under strange circumstances, while others vanish without a trace. This show discusses cases of people who mysteriously disappear and have not been found to this day. This is Disappeared, the podcast series.
Hello everyone, this is Disappeared, the podcast series, and I am your host, Benjamin. This is my first episode in this series where I discuss cases of people who seem to vanish and nobody knows what happened to them. Some cases have leads while others do not. Some of these cases I have dug up are very strange and unexplained, and these disappearances range from recent years back to the 1980s. I have a bizarre fascination with people who disappeared during the 80s, and I do not fully understand the extent of my fascination with this decade. My best explanation is that I was a huge Unsolved Mysteries fan when I was a kid, and for those who have not heard of this TV series, it was a show that featured Robert Stack, and he covered everything from missing persons to buried treasure to hauntings and so on. Unsolved Mysteries had none of the modern elements of television effects we have today, but was still utterly creepy to the bone. For me, it wasn't the elements of the filming process, but the cases themselves. I really wish they would continue a series like Unsolved Mysteries today, but until then, I decided to give it a shot and create a podcast focused on people who disappear and remain missing to this day. I want to focus on cases that have depth to them, but are also unexplainable. I also want to focus on cases that people may have not heard of. There are numerous famous cases of mysterious disappearances out there, yet so many cases that are equally as chilling and eerie go relatively undetected by the popular outlets. This is where my show comes in. Now, if you have any ideas for cases that you know of, but have heard little about, or if you want to hear more about a case that you're familiar with, you can email me at DisappearedSeries@gmail.com, or you can leave a comment in the description below. So, the first case of this series I will get into is the case of Trenton Duckett. Now, Trenton Duckett, he is from the state of Florida. He went missing at just 2 years of age, and the date he went missing was Sunday, August 27th of 2006. He has brown hair, brown eyes, he is 3 feet 0 inches tall at the time he disappeared, and his weight was 30 pounds. His race is Asian and Caucasian. His mother is Asian and his father is Caucasian. He is from Leesburg, Florida, which is in Lake County. And his case is still an active Amber Alert case. I found this case on the charlieproject.org and on the Missing Endangered Persons Information Clearinghouse on the Florida Department of Law Enforcement website under the Unsolved Amber Alerts section. I know that's a mouthful of words for a website section, but I wanted to at least inform you as to where I got this case from. Again, this case is still an active Amber Alert case, despite the fact that it is over 10 years old. And the Florida Department of Law Enforcement website has the Amber Alert flyer, and I will provide that link below, as well as some other links that I will talk about throughout this episode. So for my first few shows, I want to cover some cases that are closer to my neck of the woods, which is the state of Florida. The first case I chose is a very bizarre and interesting case. It has many elements, and as I read the case, when I thought it couldn't get any stranger, it did. This case involves not only the abduction of a 2-year-old boy, but also a person on death row, a mother with conflicting stories, a suicide, a lawsuit against Nancy Grace, a shooting range, domestic violence and a custody battle, a refusal to take a polygraph, and the failure of a voice stress test, a sum of $200,000, and the country of South Korea. If tying all those topics into one abduction isn't strange, then I don't know what is. So this is my take on the case. I have a timeline of Trenton's life, which I retrieved from the WESH2 News website. Before Trenton went missing, he was sent back and forth to live with his parents, his maternal great-grandparents, his paternal grandmother, and foster care. This timeline starts on April 6th of 2005, where Melinda, who is Trenton's mother, threatened to harm Trenton unless her husband Joshua went home to talk to her. Melinda reportedly had scars on her arms from self-mutilation and had squeezed Trenton so tightly that he was screaming. Moving up to July of 2005, Melinda allegedly dangled Trenton over water to antagonize Joshua, who was Melinda's husband and Trenton's father. Despite that fight, they both married that same month, which I think is insanely ridiculous. I mean, if you're fighting and throwing your toddler son, actually who was a baby at the time, not a toddler, and if you're throwing your baby into the middle of domestic disputes and it's getting to the point where you're dangling your child over water to make your significant other really angry, I really don't think that marriage is the right answer. It's just my opinion, but take it for what you will. Now moving up to October 31st, 2005, Halloween night, or Halloween day, it doesn't actually specify the exact time, the Department of Children and Families received a report from Lake County, Florida, stating that Melinda threatened to kill her son Trenton and held a knife against his leg while she and her husband Joshua were having an argument in the car. In the days following this argument, the Department of Children and Families removed Trenton from his home. But the court returned Trenton to Melinda's custody despite DCF's objections. This unfortunately happens way too often with kids these days. I wish the law would back Department of Children and Families organizations a lot better than they do, but unfortunately there are a lot of kids who are living very troubled lives that are having a very difficult upbringing in their homes, and they are quickly returned back to the parents that have been putting their lives through chaos. I just wish that there was more that could be done about that, but unfortunately that's a pretty common occurrence. Moving up to December of 2005, Melinda had psychological evaluations and was diagnosed with obsessive compulsive personality disorder. But the same evaluation documentation stated that there was, quote, no psychological reason that would preclude Melinda from being a capable and loving parent. Now I'm going to fast forward all the way up to August 22nd of the next year, which is 2006. Melinda spoke with a child protective investigator and told them that she lost her job and had little money to live off of. CPI referred Melinda to a website called Access, where she could apply for food stamps and other financial assistance opportunities. Moving up a few days to August 26th of 2006, Trenton is officially reported missing. Moving ahead to September 8th of 2006, Trenton's mother Melinda was found to have committed suicide by her grandfather's shotgun, and I believe she was discovered in the closet of her grandparents' home. She left suicide notes in the center console of her car, as well as $900 cash for her, quote, nanny and poppy. I'm not 100% sure on this, but I am 90% sure at least that her nanny and poppy are referred to as her maternal great-grandparents, which obviously would be her natural great-grandparents. Well, her adopted great-grandparents, which I will get into that at a later time. So recall back earlier to August 22nd of 2006, the timeline date where it is documented that Melinda talked to a child protective investigator, said she lost her job, money was tight, and she needed to apply for food stamps and so on and so forth. If that's the case, where did she get the $900 cash from in the first place? Now, Melinda was under investigation for embezzling thousands of dollars from her workplace, which was at a local bank. So perhaps this $900 was part of that sum of money. Moving all the way up to today's date, the date that I recorded this, which I may upload it tomorrow or something, so this may be a couple of days old, but moving up to January 3rd of 2017, Trenton officially still remains missing and his Amber Alert is still listed as active. Trenton is one of 5 children with active Amber Alerts in the state of Florida and remain missing to this day. The most recent case is a then 5-year-old girl who went missing back in 2009. There is one thing I want to mention regarding this timeline, and that is the alleged threats that Melinda made toward her son with regard to the knife and dangling him over water. This sounds like a classic he said, she said situation, and with the custody battle both parents were involved with, it seems possible to me that Joshua fabricated these allegations to help his chances in obtaining custody of his son. But please know that I am not accusing him of making up these allegations. I just want to make it known that it is simply possible. Okay, now I'm going to move into the specific elements of the case of Trenton Duckett, and the first thing I'm going to begin with was Trenton's bedroom window. Officers said Melinda stated that Trenton's bedroom screen was slit and he was taken from the room at night, but officers said that there was no disturbance on the ground outside the window. By the way, Melinda reported her son missing around 9:00 p.m. on the evening of Sunday, August 27th of 2006. So I took it upon myself to have a look at the ground outside Trenton's window. You can actually Google Trenton Ducket window and see the window and the ground outside of that window. There was mulch on the ground, but there are also sandy patches, little narrow sandy patches that are also in front of the window. If someone climbed into a window and pulled a toddler from the window, they would have shuffled their feet around to pull the child through the window. The ground would have certainly been disturbed, and it clearly was not. Okay. The next element I'm going to get into in this case is regarding the Ocala National Forest. Melinda told her attorney that she took Trenton to a shooting range near the Ocala National Forest and she was lost for several hours. Investigators are still trying to validate this story, but they never came up with any witnesses. My question is, does that shooting range she's referring to, does it have CCTV cameras? And if that's the case, then that would easily be able to corroborate her story. But I've not been able to find anything with regard to that. Furthermore, if an Asian woman with a shotgun and a toddler walk into a shooting range, I would assume the employees would have remembered that, but I don't know, maybe it's a very busy shooting range. They didn't give the details on the shooting range itself, so maybe that wouldn't be totally out of the ordinary, but to me, I would have probably remembered that, especially if the police or sheriffs or FBI or whoever came to me shortly after this happened, which I'm sure they would have, because Melinda, she committed suicide 12 days after her son disappeared, and she must have, obviously, had spoken to her attorney within that 12-day period. So if the attorney relayed that information to police within days of hearing that information, then it would have only been maybe 2 weeks after her son went missing at the time that the police would have interviewed employees of the shooting range. So it would have still been relatively fresh in their minds, I would think. And plus, there would have been a good chance that they may have still had video of that day. Or maybe not, I don't know. But it stands to reason that they could have. But assume that Melinda's story is actually true. Now, Melinda killed herself with her grandpa's shotgun. If she is capable of suicide, it stands to reason that she may be capable of shooting her son and burying him out in the Ocala National Forest. She told her attorney that she was out there for several hours. Maybe she thought, If the law won't let me have Trenton all to myself, then I will make sure nobody else will either. That's just, again, just my opinion. I'm just speculating on that. I did not read a quote of that from anywhere. So the shooting range may be false, but I think she may have been giving her attorney a real clue here. She could have very well spent several hours killing her son and burying him way out in the Ocala National Forest. Now, if you're not familiar with the Ocala National Forest, this stretch of wilderness is massive. It covers 430,447 acres, which is the span of 607 square miles. It is absolutely gargantuan. I mean, there are other national parks that are larger, but a national park that is over 600 square miles in size, it would be very, very easy to make somebody disappear in that vast stretch of land. There are many rivers and tons of wetland areas in this forest. She could have dumped him into a swamp off the beaten path somewhere, and he may have been consumed by alligators or other wildlife. She could have also buried him out there and threw her shovel and other tools into a nearby body of water. The Ocala National Forest is only a 34-minute drive from Leesburg, which is where the family lived at the time. And once she's in the forest, she has hundreds of thousands of acres at her disposal. Okay, moving on to the next element in the case. I'm going to talk about the possibility of Trenton being sent to Korea, and he may still be alive in Korea today. So Trenton's mother, Melinda, she is of Korean descent. She was actually born in South Korea, and at the age of 2, she was adopted by a couple living in, I believe, New York City. So she didn't grow up in Korea. She spent very little time in Korea, but she was from there originally. So there is speculation that maybe she has ties to Korea somehow, or maybe through the internet, maybe she had rekindled relationships with lost relatives that are located in Korea, and she may have sent her son there. That's speculation. They didn't find anything conclusive, although they did look pretty deeply into this possibility. An employee of a Wendy's fast food restaurant told authorities that she believed Melinda and Trenton went through the drive-thru during the day of Sunday, August 27, 2006, which was the same day that Trenton was reported missing. The drive-thru employee stated she saw an Asian woman pull up to her window and she observed a distinct tattoo on this woman's left arm. She identified the tattoo as Melinda's to authorities. So police probably showed this employee a series of tattoos, and she must have positively identified one of the photographs as a tattoo belonging to Melinda. This employee also observed a small child in the back seat and asked what his name was. The woman said, Trenton. The employee didn't hear her and removed her headset and asked her to repeat his name, and again she said, Trenton. The car eventually pulled away, but strangely, Melinda returns back to this exact same Wendy's and goes through the drive-thru around 30 minutes later. But this time the employee did not observe Trenton being in the back seat. It is believed that Melinda may have given Trenton to a person in the Wendy's parking lot or in a nearby location in Bellevue, Florida. Although he went missing 10 years ago, surely Wendy's had cameras that could corroborate this possibility. Typically, there would be a camera pointing to the drive-thru window and pickup windows to identify potential robberies and other crimes. Despite this high probability, I did not read anything which stated police successfully recovered CCTV footage from this restaurant. The only thing that I was able to scrape together was an article on Ocala.com which stated, quote, deputies were collecting store's security camera footage to see whether Duckett was in Marion County over the weekend of August 26th through 27th. And I have the link for the deputies' comment on obtaining the security footage, which is what I just read on Ocala.com. I have the link in the description below. Also in the description below, I attached 2 YouTube videos of police statements regarding the Wendy's situation. It is a single press release police gave to the press, but this video was broken up into 2 parts, so there will be 2 separate links, which I will again leave in the description below. And according to a report I found on also YouTube from Local 6 News in Orlando, which is called clickorlando.com today, reporters and police speculated that Trenton was flown out of the country during the weekend he went missing. The news also said he may have been driven to another airport or connected to a different airport before flying out of the country. My take on this theory is, did they think of the possibility that Trenton's captors may have kept Trenton in the U.S. for weeks before flying him out of the country? Or maybe even just days after the fact? If I were in the person's shoes who was trying to smuggle Trenton out of the country, I don't think I would fly him abroad on the day of or the day after he was reported missing, especially when an Amber Alert is issued for him. Maybe he was taken out of the country by boat or by car. I think the boat theory has a lot of validity to that because we live in a state that has over 1,000 miles of coastline. There are tons of waterways, and there has to be well over 1 million boats that are in this state alone. So I don't think it would have been very difficult for Melinda to either hire somebody to take care of this or to take it upon herself to arrange that her son be taken out of the U.S. by boat. And that would have been very easy to have him smuggled out of the country without being detected on a camera or anything of that nature. And also remember that Melinda apparently embezzled thousands of dollars from her workplace. She may have stolen that money just for the purpose of getting her son out of the country. So she probably had plenty of cash to hire a professional to handle her situation. Also, police are hung up on flights bound from the U.S. to Korea, but it would be extremely easy to fly to any of the 200 plus countries out there and connect to a flight bound for Korea from that outside country. They could have driven Trenton to Mexico, for example, and fly out to Paris, then connect to a flight bound for, let's say, Tokyo, then connect to a flight bound for Korea. There are just so many possibilities out there. Even the theory of him being driven out of the country. I've been to Mexico twice, but I've never driven to Mexico. I've only seen the border through the TV. So I don't know exactly how it's handled there. But it seems to me that it's like a highway. You just drive right through the border without even stopping if you're leaving the U.S. for Mexico. But perhaps, maybe that's not true. Maybe they stop, I don't know, 4 out of every 5 people or something like that. But even if that's the case, a person who's abducting Trenton or someone who's trying to smuggle him out of the country may have been willing to take that risk to get him out of the U.S. And once he's in Mexico, well, it would be beyond easy to take him anywhere else throughout the world that they wanted to take him. Regardless of the method of transportation, if Melinda really sent Trenton to South Korea, I don't think she would commit suicide to keep that a secret. She may have had to put up with a court battle and possibly some jail time, but if she refused to give up his location in Korea, I doubt she would spend a significant amount of time in prison. She did state that her and her estranged husband engaged in domestic violence frequently, and Melinda accused Joshua, her husband, of abusing little Trenton, but he denies this, of course. He did, however, pass a polygraph test, which I guarantee you they asked him those types of questions. Police also found a fake email Melinda typed up using Joshua's email account, which contained violent threats against her and their son. Officers believe she was trying to validate her accusations by setting up her husband. It doesn't make sense to me that she would kill herself just to keep Trenton's location in Korea a secret from his father, Joshua. In my opinion, it wouldn't be worth taking her own life over. She was in college for criminal psychology, for crying out loud. She must have known that she wouldn't face grave punishment if she snuck her son out of the country to live in Korea or any other country. And what kind of a charge would they be able to charge her with if she's the one that has custody? I'm sure it is an illegal act to sneak your child out of the country, especially when you're amidst a custody battle. But if you're not the person who single-handedly or directly took your child out of the country, I don't think that they could charge you with abduction, could they? I mean, they could charge you as being an accomplice, of course, but I mean, unless they have direct evidence through video footage or something, it would be really hard to prove that a specific person did abduct her son Trenton unless they had that person in custody and they were refusing to say where they took Trenton, if the police actually had Trenton on camera with this person. I think it would get pretty complicated, and perhaps she would have to spend some time behind bars, but I don't think she would get life imprisonment if she came forward and said, yes, I had him snuck out of the country. It would probably ruin her reputation, which I think was pretty well ruined throughout this process already, especially with the Nancy Grace situation, which I'll get to in a short little bit. But is it really worth committing suicide over? Either spend a little time behind bars or just end your life. I can't make a comparison there. Like I can't really understand how you could connect those two, or weigh your options, I should say, between those two and choose suicide over a little bit of jail time. I just don't get that. So I'm not sure if she committed suicide just to keep her son's whereabouts a secret, as in him being smuggled out of the country. I really don't buy it, but if you have a different opinion, definitely share it, leave a comment or something, or perhaps if there's something that you know that I don't know, that I had overlooked, then definitely share that as well. Anyway, let's move on to the next element, which is Trenton's grandfather on death row and his possible involvement. Now, this guy is one real piece of garbage. I would really like to say some really rough words about him, but I'm trying to keep this podcast as clean as I possibly can. That way it's open for everybody who's willing and interested in listening. But this guy is quite a despicable human being. I personally have a special form of hatred toward people like Trenton's grandfather, who is named Jimmy Duckett. Back in 1987, Jimmy was a police officer on duty and was arrested and convicted of raping and killing an 11-year-old girl. This little girl, Teresa Maccabee, went to a convenience store to buy a pencil because she was probably needing one for her homework. This officer makes her get into his patrol car and drives her to a secluded area where he raped her and threw her into a lake where she later drowned. Fortunately, this character was a very stupid individual and left investigators with an easy slam dunk case. Because this is Florida, naturally he was sentenced to death for his crimes. But unfortunately for us, the state is unable to waterboard this guy to death because, in my opinion, that is exactly what he deserves. But this guy was sentenced to death in 1988. What in the world is taking Florida so long? Just end this guy already. It's been 28 years. As a taxpayer, I have paid enough to keep this guy alive, okay? Anyway, there are plenty of people who would surely want to take revenge against Jimmy Duckett. But I have doubts that revenge would involve kidnapping his 2-year-old grandson. But don't get me wrong, the possibility is there. Maybe someone thought that since he took the life of a child, they would take the life of his grandchild. An eye for an eye, so to speak. It's possible, but I find it pretty unlikely. Now, another theory could be that Jimmy is a gang member in prison and a rival prisoner gang had Trenton kidnapped. It is reported that Melinda took Trenton to visit with his grandfather in prison because it's so lovely to allow death row inmates to have visitations. Yeah, that makes so much sense. Sure, they're on death row, They're going to die soon. The state is going to put them to death. But yeah, why not let them have visitation? I mean, they should totally have the right for that. I mean, what is wrong with this state? Anyway, so that's the end of that element. Moving on to the Nancy Grace part. Now this gets interesting. Melinda, who is again Trenton Duckett's mother, went on Nancy Grace via phone call and was apparently verbally slaughtered by Nancy Grace's interview. I was unfortunately unable to find the interview itself, but an article on ABC News states that, quote, Grace accused Duckett of hiding something, apparently because of her vague answers and unwillingness to take a lie detector test, end quote. The same day the interview was scheduled to air, which was the very next day after the interview was conducted, Melinda killed herself. Nancy Grace was successfully sued by Melinda's family for $200,000. So they might not have aired the broadcast, especially once they found out Melinda had committed suicide shortly after the interview. The $200,000 does have strings, which are to be given to Trenton as a trust fund if he is found alive by the time he reaches 13 years of age. But in the meantime, those funds can be spent toward the effort to find Trenton. If he is not found, the remaining funds will be donated to charity. As far as this interview, I think Melinda was subjected to the brutal reality that she will be utterly tormented by the public once they find out she is a prime suspect, if she wasn't the prime suspect already. This may have put her over the edge and gave her the ammunition, no puns intended, she needed to commit suicide. Not because she was grieving for her son, but because of how the world now sees her, a cold-blooded mother who killed her own son. Let's go to the next part of this case, which is the possibility that a friend or a relative had abducted Trenton. It may be possible that a family friend or a relative observed the atmosphere Trenton was being raised in and decided to take it upon themselves to give Trenton a better environment to grow up in. He may have been kidnapped by someone close to him, and they have simply not been located. Perhaps they left the state or even left the country. In this scenario, I would assume they left the country for a period of time until the case went cold. After all, there was a full-on Amber Alert out for Trenton, and the public generally doesn't ignore these alerts. Whenever I receive an alert on my phone or notice a highway marquee with Amber Alert information on it, I take note of the license plate and especially the car make and model. And I'll spend at least the next 24 hours with the car make and model in my mind. And if I see the exact make and model, I haven't actually observed this before, but if I were to see that exact make and model and it looked out of place or suspicious or anything, all I would have to do is just open up my text message and the Amber Alert is right there. So anyway, if little Trenton was kidnapped by someone close to him, they have long since disappeared. But surely the police would notice a family friend or a relative disappearing the same time as Trenton disappeared. I don't think they would keep that information a secret, especially with an active Amber Alert on Trenton. The last item I have on this case is the possibility that Trenton was kidnapped by a stranger. He was a victim of a random kidnapping. The abduction from his room doesn't sound very probable, but it is still possible. If that's the case, he could be anywhere. Although that possibility has merit, I just cannot get over the fact that Melinda killed herself just 12 days after her child went missing. If I were in her shoes, suicide would be the last thing on my mind. I would be dealing with complete torment, not knowing where my child was or what was happening to him. But the fear of not knowing would have me out looking for my child constantly. If my child went missing 10 years ago like Trenton, I would still be devoting every second I could spare to finding my child. But people handle pain in different ways. Maybe she couldn't handle her son's kidnapping anymore. But where was the emotion? Someone who is ready to end it all because their son went missing days prior would certainly be visibly distressed, right? I mean, maybe I'm wrong. I don't know. But the police state Trenton's screen was slashed on Trenton's bedroom window. What I tried to find, and was unsuccessful at doing so, was whether the screen was cut from the inside or outside. Forensics could easily make that determination by looking at the broken screen fibers, if they are pointing out of the window or into the bedroom. Since I didn't see anything regarding this, I assumed the screen was cut from the outside. Otherwise, the police would have made a statement about the screen being cut from the inside, which would have taken the investigation into a more definitive direction, namely Trenton's family and family friends. So that's all I have for the different aspects of this case. My personal opinion, and by gathering everything up, reading everything carefully, my final conclusion would be that the most possible answer is that Melinda did in fact kill her son and disposed his body in the Ocala National Forest. I don't believe she attended a shooting range because she would have been sighted by someone there. Given the timeline I talked about earlier, with Melinda allegedly threatening Trenton with a knife, holding him upside down over the water, and making other threats to harm him, assuming that is all true, I believe she would be capable of committing this crime if those allegations have merit. You can also watch interviews of Melinda with the press, and she shows little emotion on camera. If anything, she seems to be showing some level of guilt. A week after her son went missing, and either feeling an overwhelming amount of guilt or in fear of being imprisoned perhaps, she took her own life. Because of the level of emotion she should have displayed after her son went missing, but did not, I believe she was more afraid of prosecution and imprisonment. Her suicide note to the public illustrated her stress toward the public judging her. Her note to the public was full of me's and I's and other first-person references, rather than focusing on her distress in her son's disappearance, although she did make a few mentions of her son going missing. Besides, what parent would kill herself just a week and a half after her only child goes missing? I cannot wrap my head around that. The last thing on my mind would be suicide. How does that help you find your child? Did she think about what her son would feel if he is found and later learned that his mom killed herself? I guess I could understand a parent not being able to take the agony after a period of months or years, but not a week. After all, she was not overwhelmed with grief at any point while on camera. She was not visibly crying, she was not hysterical, and she was not clearly bawling her head off or anything like that. In her suicide note to her nanny and Poppy, she said she killed herself because she can never be a good mother even after her son is found. She also went on to mention that she worked 2 jobs and was going to school, college, and wasn't devoting enough hours, minutes, and seconds to her son on a daily basis. But what kind of excuse is that to commit suicide? Trenton was in the care of several other relatives at different times in his life. If you won't be a good parent, give him up to relatives. Don't kill yourself. Anyway, so in conclusion, I believe she did kill her son in the wilderness, and she took her own life just a week after he went missing so she wouldn't be prosecuted and heavily ridiculed by the public. I also believe she killed her son as a way to keep him away from his father. I'm not sure what her method of thinking was regarding that theory, but maybe somehow she thought that he would be better off passing away than he would be being raised by his father or something like that. I'm not really sure what logic that may have transpired in her mind with regard to that, but it's not unheard of. There have been cases like that before. Those cases like, if I can't have my children, nobody's going to have my children. I would say in many of those cases, those people have documented mental issues, but it's not completely unheard of. It has happened in the past. I certainly hope I'm wrong about my theory and my assumption on the result of this case. And the police apparently have other beliefs because the case is still open and Trenton's Amber Alert is still active. So, what do you believe happened to little Trenton? Was he the victim of a random kidnapping? Did his mother kill him? Was he a victim of his grandfather's criminal past? Or was he flown out of the country? Or do you have your own theory? You can leave me a comment below in the description, or you can send me an email to DisappearedSeries@gmail.com. I am always open to case suggestions, as I mentioned before, so if you have one, please email that to me as well. 2-year-old Trenton Ducket was last seen in the area of Lady Lake, Florida on August 26th of 2006. He was last seen wearing a green and blue striped shirt, blue denim shorts, and no shoes. Anyone seeing Trenton's mother or her vehicle in the vicinity of the Ocala National Forest or the Orlando area on Saturday or Sunday, August 26th or August 27th of 2006, is urged to call police. Trenton is biracial. He is Asian and Caucasian. I have a link below in the description, as again I mentioned before, to Trenton's missing person flyer, and Trenton's photo has been progressed to 9 years old in that flyer. There are also photos of his parents and I believe a few additional photos as well on that flyer. If you have any information at all concerning the whereabouts of Trenton Duckett, please contact the Florida Department of Law Enforcement or the Leesburg Police Department at area code 352-787-2121. Again, that's 352-787-2121. Or you can simply dial 911 and share your tip with the 911 dispatcher. And that's all I have for the Trenton Duckett case. Before I go, I wanted to share something with all the parents out there. How can you best ensure your child will not become a victim of kidnapping? Well, I put together a list of things you can do to protect your family. The first tip is pretty obvious, but definitely necessary. For your home, you can purchase a home security system with alarms connected to your child's windows. Surveillance systems are very cheap these days, and they aren't difficult to install. You can even purchase wireless cameras to make the installation easier. Install cameras that watch over your children's outside windows as well as other access points around your home. You can also install interior cameras in your home, but if you are to do this, you must be mindful of your camera's online capabilities. Take steps to encrypt and secure your camera system so that outsiders cannot see the inside of your home. All a kidnapper needs is a video of kids in your home to target your house. My second tip is that you can keep a firearm in your home, but you must take the necessary steps to educate your kids on firearm safety. Do not hide your guns from your kids. Tip number 3. One of my best suggestions is to have a medium to large size dog. Now, dogs make the best security measures because people naturally tend to fear large sounding dogs, especially the sound of a large dog through a window that one could not see through. The sound of an angry bark is usually enough to keep bad guys out of your home. Personally, I have a pit bull and I would highly suggest that breed. Our big little guy is totally adorable. Strangers tend to be pretty afraid of him, of course, because he's a pit bull, and he loves our kitties to death. I mean, seriously, they actually sleep together. And I've even posted a couple of YouTube videos out there to illustrate that. I mean, he's very loving toward our kitties and everybody he knows. He's just an amazing dog. And on the other hand, when he hears somebody knock on the door, he's got the angriest sounding bark, and he just makes a great security measure as well as an amazing family pet. So tip number 4, you can purchase a home phone. Now, I know it's not the 1990s anymore, but having a corded house phone, not a cordless house phone, but a corded house phone will always be in the same place and you can always just grab it, dial the phone, and not have to worry about signal issues or battery issues or anything else that cordless phones and cell phones tend to have. You can place a phone in every child's bedroom and educate them on 911. Make sure the phone is within reach from your children's beds. That way, if there is an emergency situation, all they have to do is reach, pick up, dial, and that's it. They don't have to run across the room or anything like that. They have the quickest possible access to the phone. Tip number 5, definitely educate your kids on strangers and tell them to never open the door for anyone, even if you are home and they don't have your permission. They should also not answer the phone if they don't recognize the number. A stranger could easily call and phish information from your kids. Tip number 6, when your kids play outside, always at all times keep an eye on them. And even go as far as to not fully trust other adults, possibly even adults you may know, to watch your kids for you, because nobody loves your kids like you do. You're the one that cares the absolute most for your kids, and you're the one that would sacrifice life and limb to protect your children. So sit there and observe your kids, always keep an eye on them. Just make sure that they are always in plain view of either people you know or yourself. Also, never let your kids out of your sight in public places for any reason at all. If they ask to use the restroom, for example, stand right outside the door the entire time. Tip number 7. Now, this may be a little overly paranoid, but when you're going into a store or a public place where there are cameras around and you have your child or your children with you, point to the camera and make sure they see you pointing to the camera and just say smile, and they all smile, and it's kind of a fun split-second thing to do, and they see it as being all in good fun. But what you're doing is you are showing your children to the camera that is recording, and if anything was to happen, they have a clear physical description of not only your kids but you as well as their parent on a CCTV camera. And that way, police could use that later if necessary, or if the worst possible thing was to happen to your kids. Tip number 8, make sure your kids memorize your phone number and address. And don't forget the zip code either. Much of the time, it's not really that necessary as long as you have the town, but it never hurts to have your kid also learn the zip code. Tip number 9, if you follow all the guidelines and a stranger comes in contact with your child, make sure they know to yell fire instead of help me. People tend to run toward a fire more often than cries for help. Tip number 10, when in the car, always keep the doors locked, and obviously never leave your kids alone in the car, not even for 30 seconds. I always keep pepper spray in the console of my car just in case someone tries to attack me in my vehicle, so that may be something useful to keep in your vehicle in case something bad were to happen. Maybe if somebody smashed your window randomly or something like that. I also hear that wasp spray is a great defense tool to keep handy, because it can have up to a 30-foot spray range and would be absolute agony to get that stuff in your eyes, I would imagine. But I don't know how a can of wasp spray would hold up in a hot car though, so maybe the car is not the best place for it. Tip number 11. Every time you go to a place where kids play, always tell them that if they get lost, to meet at a specific landmark they will remember. Tip number 12. Many people think that a 5-year-old having a cell phone is crazy, but phones come equipped with GPS, and if your child goes missing, there is a chance that they will retain that phone and can be tracked by authorities. And last but not least, tip number 13, educate your kids on abduction prevention. There is an amazing website created by the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children called take25.com. That is TAKE, the number 25.com. And this website provides safety tips, tools, lessons, and conversation starters that parents can use with their kids. And that concludes my list. If I didn't mention something on this list that you believe should be added, just leave me a comment below, or you can send me an email, and I will update the list for a future show. I also plan to add this list to my new website as well, which is DisappearedSeries.weebly.com. And that's it for this first episode of Disappeared, the podcast series. Don't forget to check out my new website at DisappearedSeries.weebly.com for my latest episodes and other information. Thank you very much for listening, and stay safe out there.